Back. Welcome home as a former member of the European Parliament. The floor is yours, sir.
Senhor Presidente do Parlamento Europeu, Senhor Presidente da Comissão Europeia,
President of the European Commission, President of the Parliament, dear members. I would like first and foremost to thank President Tajani for giving me a chance to address the European Parliament to discuss with you the future of Europe. It's always a delight for me to return to this House, where I served, albeit briefly, as an MP and Vice President. And this House has contributed as the only directly elected European institution. It has contributed so much to increasing transparency and democracy in Europe. I likewise welcome the President of the Commission, whose vision and pragmatism and experience and his European-mindedness have assisted us greatly in our quest for solutions when it comes to overcoming divisions and bolstering our union. In recent years, the EU has been rocked by a series of crises unprecedented in its history, which have shaken it to the core, from the great economic recession of 2008 to Brexit and the awful refugee crisis in the summer of 2016. Admittedly, we are now enjoying a moment of calm. At last, we can celebrate the return of economic growth, and we've ensured that Brexit has not marked the start of the disintegration of Europe. But that said, there is no reason for complacency. The EU must live up to its historic responsibility. In Bratislava, the member states undertook to stay united and to make the EU attractive and more worthy of the trust and support of our citizens. In Brussels, before this Parliament, on behalf of the Commission, President Juncker tabled an ambitious white paper on the future of Europe. In Gothenburg, we proclaimed the 20 principles of the social pillar. The leaders' agenda, put forward by President Tusk, has allowed an outspoken and direct debate between the heads of state and government. The question today is simple. Do we want to continue promising much and delivering little, or can we really honour the commitments we made to our citizens? Will we have the courage to make choices and endow the EU with resources and instruments to face up to the challenges we are grappling with? Perhaps because Portugal returned to Europe after a lengthy 48 years of dictatorship, 13 years of anachronistic colonial wars in Africa, and because we suffered the tensions of the revolutionary founding period of our democracy. Portugal fully understands that being European is not just a happenstance of geography or history. More than a single currency, more than the single market, Europe is a community, first and foremost, of values. Being European means belonging to a shared system of values: peace, unconditional defence of democracy, the primacy of rule of law, freedom, equality, human dignity, and solidarity. It were these very values that led Portugal to join Europe. It was the wish to consolidate our refound democracy, to be able to share in an area of freedom, security, peace, and prosperity. This was the vision of Mário Soares, who applied for membership of the EEC as was in 1977 and signed the Treaty of Accession in 1985. Once again, I would like to thank President Tajani for the tribute paid by this Parliament to this great European figure. Sharing a common house and sharing the same values does not mean, clearly, forsaking our identity. nor ditching our freedom to make our own choices. The future of Europe is not compatible with a single one-track way of thinking, whatever that philosophy is. Democracy in Europe cannot be forced into the straitjacket of the belief that there is no alternative. Quite the opposite. It means all of us agreeing to come up with rules so that we can live together, which give each of us the freedom to follow our own course in accordance with the rules we have agreed upon to the benefit of one and all. As in any large family, sharing a house with 28 or 27 other members is not always easy. That's why rules are required. But these rules are not there to make all of our policies identical. They are there to ensure that our joint commitments can be met through different policies chosen in a democratic and sovereign way by our electorates. In Portugal, we devised an alternative to the austerity policy, focusing on higher growth, more and better jobs, and greater equality. The rise in earnings made economic operators more confident, resulting in the fastest economic growth since the beginning of the century, and it has produced a sustained rise in private investment, exports and jobs. Of course, we did things differently, but we stuck to the rules. And in fact, today, our public finances are in far better shape than they were 3 years ago. In 2017, we exited the excessive deficit procedure. And last year, we had the lowest deficit since democracy was restored. And last week, the European Commission removed Portugal from the list of countries with serious macroeconomic imbalances. However, the most important point of all is that our affirmation of sovereign democracy meant that people regained trust in the democratic institutions and in their belief in the European Union. As we can see in the last Eurobarometer, the Portuguese clearly strongly support the EU. That is why we are not suffering from any existential crisis. We wish to build our future in the EU with all those who want the same thing. We are facing a tremendous amount of challenges: climate changes, instabilities on our external borders, terrorism, globalization, the digital switch and migration. But we must be mindful of the fact that none of the major challenges we are facing could be better solved outside the EU by each member state acting on its own bat, no matter how rich the member state is or how large its population. Only the EU, acting in concert, will be able to lead a joint action across the world to implement the Paris Agreement, which is vital to address climate changes which are threatening the very existence of humanity. Only united by permanent structured cooperation can we help one another to take a greater responsibility, acting in complementarity with NATO to address the instability on our borders which threatens peace and security. Only by standing together can we bolster police cooperation, judicial cooperation and the exchange of information between our intelligence services to face up to terrorism, which is spreading fear on the streets of our cities. Only the EU can maintain a trade policy to help regulate global markets and protect the high social, environmental and food safety standards that we wish to retain. Regulating globalization, which challenges the sustainability of the European social model. Only through the development of the social pillar, the single market, joint investment in the knowledge society, in energy transition, will we be able to ensure growth and dignified jobs. This is the only effective answer to the anxiety kindled by the transition to digital services and automation, because people are concerned about the future of work. Only on a European scale can we feasibly address the roots of the problems of migration that have shifted the balance of our societies by promoting inclusive growth and sustainable development, peace and human rights in Africa, cooperation with countries of origin and transit, joining in the call of the Secretary-General of the UN, António Guterres, for a new global compact for migration. Just as only with solidarity between us all, we are able to protect our joint external border against organised crime networks of human traffickers and share the humanitarian duty to ensure international protection is provided to all those who need it. Now, these challenges are out there and we have to face them. No question about that. Not with large-scale institutional debates or stymieing revisions to the treaty. The key thing is to define clearly what we want to do. The institutional architecture is but a tool to achieve it. Turning things on their head is counterproductive. This will only divide us on secondary elements before uniting us on the fundamentals. Time is pressing, and our focus has to be on citizens, by listening to them and returning their trust in our ability to face up to and overcome all of these challenges. What sets democratic politics apart from populism is that democratic politics does not tap into fears. It does not feed on problems. Quite the opposite. Democratic politics feels people's problems, combating fears and angst, and gives hope back to people in their future. We cannot confront globalization by closing borders or building walls, withdrawing into a protectionist mindset, or drifting towards xenophobia. We must make it patently clear that these are not and will never be options for Europe. Europe can only gain from continuing to project a vision of a union open to the world, from Japan to Mercosur. Globalization demands from us that we invest in training and education, and training in innovation, and in the infrastructure we require to be part of global networks. Only a cohesive society in social and territorial terms will sustain competitiveness. It behoves us as politicians to respond to the legitimate anxieties of European citizens. But we will only succeed in this if we are able to build a genuine European Union that is more economically, socially and politically cohesive. For this to be tenable, there are two very clear priorities: the completion of economic and monetary union, the most ambitious project we have ever put into practice, and providing the EU with the resources to live up to its responsibilities and the challenges we must grapple with. Dear members, convergence is the key to union in Europe. It is the only way to ensure the required stability of the eurozone by reducing risks and sharing benefits. The financial crisis lifted the lid on the weaknesses of the single currency. Faced with an emergency, we avoided, by and large, a meltdown thanks to the ECB. We avoided the breakup we were on the brink of. And we created, with the Juncker plan, a new instrument to support investment, which was then strengthened with the helpful contribution of this Parliament. Nonetheless, even with these steps forward, the structural weaknesses of the eurozone have yet to be resolved. The asymmetries and imbalances between its members limit growth potential and endanger the stability of the single currency. As long as economic and monetary union is still incomplete, there will still be a risk of further crises. We need to tap into this moment of market optimism and growth to breathe new life into the economic and monetary union. This in turn will strengthen convergence and prevent future crises. Economic and monetary union will never reach its full potential if supported by the monetary pillar alone. To save us time, I shall not dwell on the themes of the banking union, which we still need to run off this debate. We need to clarify the budgetary rules or the developments in the European Stability Mechanism. I shall focus on what I deem fundamental to optimise the eurozone as a monetary union, correcting asymmetries and strengthening convergence. Any monetary union worthy of the name has a fiscal capacity. That is why I want to see the eurozone establish its own fiscal capacity in conjunction with the European semester. This fiscal capacity could help to maintain stability when faced with external shocks, but its main aim must be investment by providing financial tools to implement the country-specific recommendations set forth in the national reform programmes. This does not mean setting up a transfer union or mechanisms for financing national inefficiency. Let me be plain. I don't want permanent transfers. The convergence mechanism I am putting forward should have a contractual basis, as mentioned recently by the Commission, the idea being to implement reforms which are tailor-made to each country according to its structural obstacles. The purpose would be to help a country improve its potential growth with quantified and timetabled targets, where compliance would result in the stepwise phased transfer of tranches of financing. For example, looking at Portugal's country report, our priority must be to invest in education, lifelong learning, research and development, innovation, setting success metrics and deadlines for delivery. Support for convergence is the right way to make each member state responsible for carrying out the reforms it needs. This is the best means for ensuring the stability of the eurozone and of combining economic growth with budgetary discipline. This means encouraging reforms by creating positive conditions rather than establishing punitive measures. We cannot continue to perceive the eurozone just as a group of economies that compete with each other and the rest of the world. We have to view it as an integrated space whose prosperity and cohesion benefits all of its members. The aggregate value of the whole zone is contingent on the success of each and every member. The long-term sustainable stabilisation of the eurozone is the first requirement if we are to build the future of Europe on solid foundations. The second condition is to endow the EU with a budget which matches its needs and ambitions. In its recent report on the multi-annual financial framework, the European Parliament stated that more European programmes and policies can only be achieved if we have more resources, not less. We agree with the view of this Parliament, and we are embarking on this new round of negotiations on the MFF with a clear stance. We have to boost the Union's own resources, and that means increasing the contributions of all member states. Portugal is ready to step up its contribution and to support the creation of new open own resources for the Union, as proposed in the Monti report that has received input from a large number of sources. This is the only way in which we can follow through on our commitment to our citizens, that we will improve security and safety in the face of climate change, external threats and terrorism, the future of our social model, employment and management of migration, without giving up on the policies that are already part and parcel of the EU's identity, such as the common agricultural policy or the cohesion policy. Sacrificing these policies would be a grave mistake. The success of the CAP cannot be whittled down to ensuring food security in Europe, just as the success of cohesion policy cannot be limited to its contribution to economic and social modernisation of our territories. Their major added value has been to bring the EU into the everyday life of its citizens. With the CAP and cohesion policy, Europe has trickled down into each village, each town, each territory. Be these territories large cities to the outermost or ultra-peripheric regions. We must speak the truth to our citizens. We cannot want more from Europe without giving more to Europe. We cannot assign more responsibilities to Europe without increasing our contributions and without boosting Europe's own resources. But we cannot simply want more and more and more. We must also be able to do things better and differently by taking advantage of the complementary elements of policies and tools and enhancing their effectiveness. First and foremost, the effectiveness of competitiveness and cohesion. We need a more competitive economy in the global market and a society which is more internally cohesive. But we must also be mindful of this. The common agricultural policy has made a tangible contribution to help us to deal with climate change. Likewise, cohesion policy must assist us in preventing radicalisation in our cities by focusing more on people as an instrument of our social pillar. By the same token, cohesion cannot be left out of programmes such as Horizon 2020 or the European Defence Fund. That should not make our asymmetries worse. So convergence must be the value-added criterion that is present across the board in all areas of policy and in all tools. These tools and policies should complement each other so as to boost the potential success of them all. President, members of the European Parliament, we are all aware of how difficult these debates are on completing the economic and monetary union and the adoption of the next multi-annual financial framework, the MFF. None of these issues will become less difficult if we postpone them. Doing so will just further reduce the trust our citizens have in us. They must believe we are able to make decisions and cater to the fears and anxieties and needs of our citizens. Therefore, we must do our level best to round off on these debates during the current term of office of the EP. This responsibility is incumbent on all of us. We have to rise to the challenge of our times. Speaking just for Portugal, you can certainly count on us. Once again, and as always, Portugal is counting on Europe, and Europe can count on Portugal. The challenges which lie ahead are demanding, but whenever we doubt our ability to overcome them by working together, we must remember the words of Simone Veil, the first directly elected President of the European Parliament.
Je suis, je reste.
I am and I continue to be optimistic. Life has taught me that in time, progress always wins out. It is lengthy, it is slow, but at the end of the day, I am trusting and confident. Thank you.